Hello and welcome to the Not Ready for Primetime podcast. We're Gary Seath and Brad Robinson.
And you're not.
This week we are talking about season 2.
All of it, baby.
All of it. The whole thing. We're in.
We made it.
We made it through.
Not gonna lie, man, I am exhausted.
From watching the show or from life?
Well, listen, we should say a week and a half, roughly, from this episode dropping, will be 1 year since our first episode, George Carlin hosting, came out.
That's amazing.
It was my understanding there would be no math. But if a year is like 52 weeks, and this is like our 50 or 49th episode, like that's a shit ton of episodes for people who don't know what we're doing. Or didn't, I should say. Maybe now we do, sort of. Somewhat.
Maybe.
Somewhat.
I don't know. Let's not give an opening to folks to
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Debate us on
Please
that
rate and review because we need more reviews to quote.
Season 2 was, it was a lot of fun.
It was
very different than season 1, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
It felt like they were starting to get a hold of themselves, much like you and I. And
sure.
Starting to understand, what it meant to be on the show, to have the show, to create the show every week.
Yeah, it started getting into its own, or like it got away from that variety show vibe we kept feeling during season 1,
right? And
more towards what a lot of people would consider the show today. The format and those kind of things. It feels more like the show than it did.
And there were far fewer musical numbers by hosts.
By hosts, at least, yes.
Yeah, by hosts. And like you said, less of a variety show feel anyway.
And that's one of the things I liked the most, like this season, was watching the show come into its own, like find that footing and kind of leave that variety aspect behind. Like it was one of the things I enjoyed the most about the season as a whole.
It felt more like a comedy show wherein the performers were starting to develop personalities and characters that you came to recognize. And we saw many more recurring characters this season than we did in season 1.
Yeah.
And they started to work better as a group too, in different pairings and trios, I guess, that worked and some that didn't.
Which isn't to say they didn't take chances either, which is another thing I loved. I loved watching them. They took a lot of chances this season, which I think is the last season we're going to see that, of those out of left field kind of sketches, the bizarreness. I think as they make that transition out of season 2 into season 3, we're going to lose that. And I really did enjoy that because all season long they would do that. And it was a lot of fun. And I think a little bit in hindsight of knowing this is the last time we're going to see that kind of stuff.
And it is kind of a bummer because aside from just the cast kind of finding themselves and finding their voices, you saw that with the writers too.
Yeah.
You could see distinct pieces that you knew were written by Franken and Davis or Marilyn Suzanne Miller. Still, Michael O'Donoghue had those pieces that we could point them out, but there weren't as many of those that we could point to him.
Or there were other voices. Like season 1 felt very O'Donoghue heavy, and you could see other writers starting to shine a little bit more. Yeah, I agree. And I also like probably the third thing I like the most of season 2 is just the way that they had so many out of the box hosts, but made them work. I feel like they had a lot of hosts you wouldn't expect, but they really did a good job for the most part of like writing for them and those hosts themselves performing for the most part.
Yeah,
that was a lot of fun. I got to say too.
As I was going through this season today, I thought that there were some hosts that they could write a little bit for here and there. Maybe not for the entire show, unfortunately, but they definitely got 1 or 2 sketches for everyone that felt like, oh yeah, they understand the voice of this person or how to use Jodie Foster, right? A 13-year-old host that you have. Not an ideal host, but they found ways to use her that made sense.
Well, and were you surprised by in the middle of the season, there's a really long run of like under the radar hosts from episodes 11 through 18. You take away Steve Martin and probably Sissy Spacek because she was hot at the time. But you go Ralph Nader, Ruth Gordon, Fran Tarkenton, Steve Martin, Sissy Spacek, Broderick Crawford, Jack Burns, Julian Bond. Like it's a run of hosts that you're like with those. Who are these people? Like, are you like that was one of the things that surprised me. I don't know about you, just looking at that slate and being like, what?
It felt like for me personally, it felt like we had a lot of homework to do to figure out who these people were. And I don't think we have that over the next 3 seasons. I think it's a lot. There are a lot fewer hosts that we're not going to know by name.
But they all performed, I think, for the most part. Like, if not on the whole episode, their episodes had shining moments. They had some really bright spots in them. Like, surprisingly, you look at that list and you think you're in for a long haul of ungood. And it was surprisingly much better than I anticipated.
Some of those hosts had some really nice shining moments too. Someone like a Broderick Crawford who does that film with Gary Weiss that totally took me by surprise and blew me away.
Was there anything else that you were like surprised by, like at the end of the season looking back?
Yes, I was surprised by Ralph Nader. Just as a performer, as someone who is not a performer, I should say.
Right.
But he was willing to get up there and do all of these different types of sketches. He did the sketch with the sex dolls that I think if you had said before they're going to do a sex doll sketch with Ralph Nader, I would not have believed you. So the willingness really of many of the hosts, I think Julian Bond did the same thing where there were sketches that he took part in that I was surprised across the board. I think, like you said, with the hosts, even if we didn't know who they were, and some of them were not performers like Ralph Nader, Julian Bond, they still stepped up and played along, I think, for the most part. How about you? What surprised you from this season?
I mean, aside from that, I mean, one thing which you kind of knew watching, but actually watching it again in real time is just how much Bill Murray did actually struggle to get his feet and shine on that show. It was just, I guess it was not surprising because we knew it, but just watching it unfold and watching him have those struggles was, if not surprising, just odd to watch in hindsight.
Yeah.
And the other thing was, to be honest, I was surprised how good Jane was on her own doing Weekend Update, because it's such a small, what is it, 12 episodes, if that, 16 episodes, something like that, because next year she gets teamed with Dan and then she's teamed with Bill. So this is the only time we see her by herself. And I mean, she's obviously, as we said, every week, extremely talented, but to watch her in week in and week out, like take over that update desk I was surprised how well she did, because I thought she was fantastic.
She slid in there. It wasn't seamless at first, but I think once they found the change of writing for Chevy versus writing for Jane, that was huge. And then she was great. And she had a lot of, a few standout moments this season too.
Both on Update and in general. Yeah. But I think everybody did. I mean, it's one of the things, if we get into like what we learned, at the end of the season, you look back, things you learned. I mean, one of the things I think we learned that everybody learned was that it was not just the Chevy Chase show. It took a little bit of time. We mentioned it a little bit earlier with Bill Murray, but, everybody learned that Saturday Night Live was not the Chevy Chase show and they could survive without him. So to your point about Jane and Dan and John and like everybody had Gilda a lot, took over that Live from New York mantle for a good bit. You learned the show would go on, which I think kind of touching back on our point of that run of hosts, how much of it, I think we mentioned it during one of our episodes, I think it was the Jack Burns episode, how much of it was Chevy leaving the show and then people worried the show was going to fail without him and thus not getting quality hosts for a little bit of time. I wonder.
Right. There is that fear, right? This is still an unknown show going into season 2.
Yeah.
Hadn't totally proven itself. And then the number one star from the show is leaving, 7 shows in? Or he's done?
6, right? 6 or 7, yeah.
Yeah. And so people probably were a little hesitant to dive in.
It kind of explains why you're getting Ralph Nader, Ruth Gordon, Fran Tarkenton.
Right. Right.
You're bringing, and then your last 4 episodes, you're bringing Eric Idle back, you're bringing Elliot Gould back, you're bringing Buck back. Like you're trying to end on that high note, but you've got that middle ground where people are like, let's see what happens. I don't know. Let's see how they do without this guy. Like who's, again, remember, no one knows who Bill Murray is at this point. So you're like, who's the new guy? Like literally they call him the new guy for a month.
I know. It's so funny. What was your favorite part of this season? What did you enjoy the most?
I think I enjoyed just watching the show learn what it wants to be. By the end of this, you realize, like we said, it's going to be a less variety show, more like we know it's going to be now. You realize they took a lot of swings. They did a lot of stuff out of left field. But by the end of the season, especially that Buck Henry episode, you realize they found the formula. They know what works. Take less chances. Maybe once in a while you can throw something out, but you need the broad humor. You're going to get the recurring characters. You're going to get what people want. And I just watching that arc, watching them go from episode 1 with Lily Tomlin and having it kind of be a one-woman show on that episode to the end of the season where it really was Buck took a backseat to the cast on the finale, and just watching that arc, I think was really cool.
Yeah.
You?
No, I think that's a great point. No, I think you're dead on with that, right? We really saw the show come into its own, and part of it was Chevy leaving, and they kind of had to figure out now what happens.
It's a very good point. Yep.
Right? So they bring in the new kid Murray, who doesn't, I mean, he hits it hot on his first show.
That first episode is very good. Yes, he's very good.
But then he struggles to find his way really until the end of the season. And so you see Gilda step up, you see Dan step up huge.
Jane takes over update. I mean, no one wanted that, I'm sure. Not her. I mean, no one wanted to take over for Chevy. I mean, that was his baby. So like that's like a losing battle, whoever steps up to that plate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just the growth of the show in season 2 and kind of the maturity, right? Like it's maturing into its own.
Yeah.
So
they're getting into the reckless teenage years, which is going to be fun for next season. Like they're out of infancy. This was like the toddler era where, you kind of let it slide because they're still, a little younger. They're going to figure it out, blah, blah, blah. And by the end, they started to figure it out. And then I think next year we get into it, they're in like that prepubescent, early teen years coming up.
Right. That's good. That's funny. Should we talk about some specifics from this season?
Let's do it. Why not?
What was your best impression of this season?
So I'm only new ones. I say we wouldn't take, we see Gerald Ford again. We see Nix again. We see Carter. Right. I am saying best impression of the season, Lorraine Newman's Barbara Streisand.
That's what I had.
Yes, there you go.
Same one.
Episode 12, Ruth Gordon. It was amazing. It's an amazing performance by Lorraine.
I totally agree. I mean, I remember watching that, and as soon as she came on screen, I was like, what is she? She's doing Barbara Streisand? And then she killed it. And the way she sang, it was beautiful. It was amazing.
A whole song.
Yeah,
a whole song called Me, all about her and Barbara Streisand and how important she is and great she is. And like, there was no intro. It just came in and she sang a 3-minute song and it was great.
I will say, I know we're talking about new impressions here, but talking about...
Are you going to say John's Joe Cocker with Joe Cocker? I agree, Gary. Also excellent. Well played.
I was not. And in fact, I kind of assumed that's where you were going to go. So I thought I was free and clear with the Streisand. But no, I was going to say Dan's Carter impression has just, he found it this year. I mean, you could see it up and down in the beginning of the season. By the end of the season, he had it.
Well, as we said too, he was getting more meat on the bone, which I think we both said we think Jim Downey gets a lot of credit for that. But by those last 2 sketches he did as Carter, it was more than just spoofing the old country bumpkinness of him and actually had some meat to it. And I think that goes a long way to his impression being better.
Definitely.
I thought you might throw Bill's Walter Cronkite up there. I thought that's what you might go with.
Yeah, I thought about that, and I really enjoyed that one. But I love the Streisand.
Well, I'll let you go on the next one then. Best reoccurring character introduced this season. What do you think?
I mean, I feel like we have to go with the Coneheads on this one.
Okay.
You don't?
I not that I don't like them. I went Erwin Mainway.
Oh,
Consumer Probe, Candice Bergen episode.
That's brilliant.
As a character, I think it's the best reoccurring character that gets introduced. Coneheads as a whole are their own thing, and I agree are amazing. But Erwin Mainway's pretty amazing.
Yes, he is.
Fantastic.
No, he is. No, that's a good call. You can't go wrong with that. And the Coneheads, I think they take on a life of their own, really. So. Yeah. And we thought we were losing them at the end of this season, and we did not. They come back, obviously. Who was your favorite musical guest for this season?
This hurts.
I know.
Because I want to say the band on the Buck Henry episode. But when Steve Martin hosted and the Kinks were on, goddamn, they were good. That's pretty much hands
excellent.
Yeah, that's the best act this season.
I agree. I had the Kinks.
They do a great.
It was no surprise
medley.
for me.
It's like awesome.
When we did that episode, you said how good that performance was and that it hurt you that it was better than the band.
So
but I wasn't sure if you were going to.
It is. I mean, part of it's a little unfair because they do a greatest hits medley, but still, it's just they perform. Both to the audience and the camera. I remember we talked about like Ray Davies was playing to both audiences to perfection. Even their new song when they came out for the second number and they played their news tune I didn't know the song, but it was like, goddamn, they played the hell out of it.
It's interesting with musical performers this season. We didn't have as many folks coming on singing tunes from the 30s and 40s. We had some more contemporary acts, but then we had some older acts too. So there was still that mix that we don't get in later seasons. But I felt like the contemporary ones that we had from the 70s, like the Kinks, the band, Santana, I thought was
Zappa,
great.
don't forget Frank Zappa. Christmas episode was fantastic.
Zappa, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting, Gary. Receiving no votes, oddly enough, was Ry Cooder, Richard Baskin, and Leo Sayer.
Yeah.
Apparently and somehow the McGarrigle sisters and Rosalind Kine somehow got -1 vote. So I don't know how this all happened, but go figure.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Sadly, Boz Scaggs received only 1 vote.
Well, and we know who that came
was.
from, so thank you, Thomas. Yeah, I think overall the musical guests were more enjoyable this season than they were last season.
Yeah.
But we certainly didn't love them all.
There was definitely a handful. You're like, what? Kinky Friedman? What?
Right.
All right. So we did our musical guests.
Yep.
Best host. Season 2, best host. Who you got?
So I have 2.
I did the same thing.
I think
we did the same thing.
My favorite, really?
I think so.
My favorite was Buck Henry. Like, I think he had his 2 performances were both very strong in the way that he plays with the cast.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought, well, he's been here before. These were his 3rd and 4th shows. So then I said Eric Idle.
So what's your final answer? Or do you have 2 answers you're saying?
Those were my 2, but I would say Eric Idle overall.
I did something similar. I took Steve Martin as best host single episode when he returned episode 14. I just thought he as a host was the best performance of a host. He was in the cold open with the locker room, which was great, had an amazing monologue, and his performances in sketches was just really, really good. He was in the Coneheads as one of like the iconic Conehead sketches, the Hollywood Squares sketch. So as a standalone episode host, Steve Martin. But then I also had like a second category of overall, and I give it to Eric Idle because I think both his performances together just brought a sensibility that were not hard to describe, but you just had to think about it more. And it really had an impact. And the fact that he was on twice, you know what I mean? Remember, he was on twice, Buck was on twice, Steve was on twice. So it was like an overall impact. I think Eric Idle over 2 episodes, I think did the best job overall, but he had 2 attempts.
Right, but they were like singular performances, right? Because he was so heavily influencing those episodes, no one else could have pulled those off.
No,
especially the whole UK telethon, like that couldn't have been done by anyone else. Right. So that's why I gave him my best host.
I did my runner-up to Steve, if you would have said Steve, was Buck Henry for the finale. And the reason I didn't pick Buck was because of how important he was to the show and making that finale as good as it was. His performances himself, as he took a back seat to everybody, which is I think what the show needed. And that's why I thought Steve as a host was a little notch above Buck. But Buck was but that finale with Buck is great.
Wow, it's tremendous. He's so good. So Brad,
Gary,
I think this is another question that I think we're going to have the same answer for, but I'm going to ask you to answer first. Who was your most valuable performer?
We have the same answer. This is Dan Aykroyd, hands down. I mean, week in and week out, the man is doing the heavy lifting. I'll go back. We were talking best reoccurring characters. You said Coneheads. I said Erwin Mainway. Right. Also on my list, Leonard Pinth Garnell and E. Buzz Miller. It's like...
right.
And once we start getting into sketches, you're going to hear Dan's name more than anybody, I think, this season. I mean, he just did everything, including writing. You could see a lot of his sketches that he wrote were prominent this season.
Right. He's credited this season as writing with Belushi and also by himself. Multiple times, multiple episodes. Let's not lose sight of the fact that he was 24 years old.
Right. Yeah.
When he did this.
Yeah.
That's insane because he's doing so many things and so many characters, right? He's like writing and he plays everyone from Richard Nixon to a guy who tricks out his van to an alien. Like, he's all over the place and he doesn't miss a beat.
No, he's doing Richard Nixon. He's doing Jimmy Carter. He's doing what other? He's got characters: Coneheads, E. Buzz Miller, Pinth Garnell. He's got everything going on. He does a Weekend Update correspondence piece at one point.
Right.
He's got some amazing solo sketches, AM, FM radio, and the Decibet character, and stuff where it's just him alone to camera this season, which is amazing. There's just nothing there's nothing he does not do this season, aside from being the musical guest, which he'll take care of next season.
Right. I was just going to say, there were entire episodes that we watched where he was the only bright spot in the entire episode. And he really, I don't think he gets enough credit for picking up the slack when Chevy left. And even before Chevy left, really, he did a lot of the heavy lifting then.
You're right.
Dan Aykroyd was outstanding this season.
Top to bottom. Couldn't argue with that.
Well, you just mentioned one of my most underrated sketches. So I'll lead this category by saying I think AM/FM is an underrated, underappreciated sketch.
It's on my list. Yep. It's on my list. Yeah. Speaking of Dan Aykroyd, you want to know what else is on my list? Metal Detector from the Jodie Foster episode. Yes. Snake Handling O'Shea's, written by him. Right. And the reunion Marilyn Suzanne Miller sketch Lunch Counter with him and Jane Curtin. Like, those three are all amazing, either underrated or forgotten sketches that Dan Aykroyd is an A+ participant in.
Plus, we're totally underselling the fact that he created the concept of Coneheads with Tom Davis.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And there's just so much that he does this entire season, and it's amazing. So
what else did you have on your underrated or your forgottens?
As Your Child Grows, the one with Bill Murray, the 5-word one. I really enjoyed that.
Okay. All right. I was going to say the other How Your Child Grows, the Buck Henry one in the finale with Jane with the Pavlov stuff.
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah. One that I think totally got lost from my memory until I saw it again was the Bat-O-Matic.
Oh, yeah.
It's one that I enjoyed at the time. And I was like, oh, you're right. He brings this back as the Bat-O-Matic.
I'd say, what else? I don't know. Gilda's Debbie Doody impression on the Weekend Update when Howdy Doody dies is pretty amazing. Speaking of Gilda, the Lucille Ball A-Bomb assembly line.
Oh, the A-Bomb sketch.
That's a great one that I feel like you don't really think about often.
No, that is a really good one.
And what else? Back to that Steve Martin episode, the Pull the Plug, where it's Bill and Jane play the parents, and John, they think John, their teenage son's dead, and they try to pull the plug.
Right.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
And listen, let's give a little love to Gary Weiss, director of Walk Like an Egyptian music video. His film with Roger Crawford was pretty great.
Yeah.
We give him a hard time, but that was a great short film by Gary Weiss.
Yeah, I pulled that as like one of my top sketches of the season. Even.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's go. Let's do top sketches then. You can start since I stole yours.
Well, that wasn't my top sketch. I think my top sketch was Consumer Probe.
I gotta agree
with Candice Bergen.
Yeah, that'd be my top sketch too. Erwin Mainway.
Right. I mean, it's so iconic. It's a singular piece. It's something you've seen. We saw it all our lives growing up on Christmas specials and stuff. So that was my number one. My number two was AM/FM because I think that sketch is so good. And Dan is so good. And
he is.
It's such a heavy lift for him going between these two characters, and they're timing it out with the sound effects. And I thought that was excellent. How about you? What's your number two?
The Coneheads with Steve Martin. I think that's a quintessential, probably the best Coneheads, and just Steve's so great in it.
Yeah, that's a really good choice.
Like, everything is in there. Everything's in that one.
Again, it's another one that it's so good that it became a staple of best of shows.
Tang, isn't that the drink astronauts took to the moon? It's like,
astronauts to the moon.
So good.
What else you got on your top list? Do you have a top five?
I did a top five.
I did top five.
Yeah. So Consumer Probe, Coneheads, Shower Mike, Bill Murray from the finale with Buck Henry. I had number 3. Then flip side, the season premiere, Debate 76, The Ford Carter debate, I think, is up there. It's one of the all-time classics. And you're gonna give me shit for this one, but my number 5 is Belushi's Luck of the Irish rant on Weekend Update. It's so goddamn good. It's so iconic. I don't know how that's not a top 5er.
You listen to that every night before you go to bed, right? That's what puts you to sleep. I can't argue with any of that. They're all so good and such, wonderful pieces for this season.
But you will, because your 3, 4, 5 were what?
My 3, 4, 5 are very different. So my number 3 is The Tomorrow Show from the Paul Simon episode.
Wow. You were pulling, okay. Between AM, FM, and that. Okay. All right.
I'm really heavy on Dan. My top 3 are Dan.
Oh, yeah.
And then my number 4 was just the overarching UK telethon piece from the second Eric Idle episode.
Which includes Dan getting
really, I
kicked in the
thought,
nuts.
pulled this whole show. It does. Yes.
4 for 4.
And Jeanette Charles. Let's not forget her. And then my number 5 was the Ask President Carter from the Sissy Spacek episode.
Played by Dan.
Played by Dan and Bill's Walter Cronkite.
Yeah. That's a good one.
So good in that sketch.
No, it is. That's a great one.
Yeah.
They're good. I had President Carter was like in my honorable mention, fighting whether or not I put it in there. Yeah. I had that. I had Paul Simon's monologue from Thanksgiving when he comes out as the turkey that's one of the best bits, I think, of the season. I mentioned Reunion, the Marilyn Suzanne Miller piece with Dan and Jane, I think, is my favorite of hers. It's like one of the lone, if not only, highlight, aside from maybe Mr. Bill, of the Karen Black episode. Santee Rap is a classic from Candace Bergen.
Yeah, I also had Santee Rap on mine and my honorable mentions. I had the Coneheads and Shower Mike, as you did. I also had a Marilyn Suzanne Miller piece. I had the Steakhouse piece from the Shelley Duvall one.
You did like that one a lot more. I don't know why I didn't like that one as much. It's not bad. It is a very good, but for some reason, I love the Dan and Jane one.
I think you got hung up on that whole pregnancy bit. You hated how fake that looked.
Maybe. Doesn't take much to turn me off.
Yeah, some of the others I liked. I really liked the Jeopardy 1999 from the Steve Martin episode.
Oh, okay.
His first episode. As I mentioned, the As Your Child Grows, when Bill Murray can only say 5 phrases, and the Broderick Crawford Gary Weiss film. And then 2 that I had that I don't think you had were Andy Kaufman's performance from the Ralph Nader episode. It was very long, but I really enjoyed it. It was one of my
when he comes out and
favorite
does Elvis
pieces from this season. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good one.
And then Bill's first sketch, the Old Man Phone Company sketch from the Ralph Nader episode. I thought Bill was excellent in that piece, and it was a great way to introduce him to the audience.
All right. You know, a couple of things we haven't mentioned. Commercial parodies. They had a couple of really good ones this season. Puppy Uppers with Gilda and Lorraine is great. And Quarry from the Paul Simon episode, when Jane is the Quarry cereal made of rocks and minerals. They're 2 quality standout commercial parodies, like all-time classic commercial parodies, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're both excellent. Good call on both of those.
You gotta shout out to those. That brings us what? Best episodes? Is that all we got left?
I think so. That's all I have left. What were your best episodes? Let you go first.
Well, we should just say we saw our list today, and we should say our top 4
are the same. 4 are the same.
Are the same.
Oh, I didn't even realize that.
So going backwards from 4 to 3, we have number 4, the Steve Martin's return with the Kinks. Eric Idle's first episode with Joe Cocker and Stuff as musical guests in October. Number 2, we both said the season finale with Buck Henry and 2 not great musical guests, but still a great episode. And we both thought the best episode of the season, Christmas, Candace Bergen's return with Frank Zappa.
Yes, absolutely. I feel really good about those 4 episodes.
Yeah, I mean they're all hands down classics. The Candace Bergen one is almost flawless. If I probably the only thing that hurts that episode is time. Like maybe some stuff doesn't age well. But like it's a great episode, and at the time it was A+ out of the park. Buck's episode is, we said it last week when we talked about it, it's what the show needed at the end of the season. It needed a strong performance by the cast, and it really sets the stage for where they're going to go moving forward.
Right.
Eric Idle comes in, and what's funny is his second episode. It's only been a couple weeks. It keeps creeping up my list. Like as the weeks have gone on, I've moved it up slowly but surely. The more you think about it, like both of those episodes, he comes in and just takes them over. And when you actually sit and think about them, but his first one was really good because you just see how much they wanted him on, and that Python mentality was just so good. And Steve's second one is fantastic. So yeah, they're a quality top 4.
Yeah. My number 5 was Eric Idle's next appearance.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's worth
so
it. It's worthy.
The telethon I thought was a brilliant concept, and it was like a Python thing in that there was that thread that pulled us through most of the episode, not the end necessarily, but I really enjoyed that episode. And what did you have as your number 5?
I had the season premiere. That Lily Tomlin episode with James Taylor. Yes, she's the centerpiece of a lot of it, but for some reason it worked. And there's just a lot of good stuff. And I think it was just, they had a lot of confidence. Chevy's still on the show, and you just tell they thought they were the shit. And they came out of the gates swinging season 1. And, she's got some great bits. We had that first sketch, like real Marilyn Suzanne Miller sketch where she plays Tess with Lily Tomlin and Garrett Morris is a great sketch. Right. You have the debate sketch that we talked about. There's just the cold open is where they start. One of the first times they do meta really well, where Guild and Chevy are outside waiting for her to show up, and through the monologues. There's just a lot of stuff working that I like that one a lot. But that Eric Idle one that you mentioned is not too far behind.
I felt better this year about having a top 8 or 9. I felt better about more episodes this season than I did last season. So it was a little harder to choose the top 5, but there were more to choose from. But they're all in that block.
We both had the Ralph Nader episode at number 6. Like there's 6, 7. Yep. I've got Eric Idle in my top 8 or 9. Broderick Crawford's up there. Conversely, I think we have the same 3 episodes as the worst.
Yes.
Jodie Foster, Brian Wilson, Norman Lear, Boz Skaggs, and that horrendous Karen Black episode as our bottom 3. Unanimous decisions bringing up the rear.
Right.
Sadly.
Right. Top and bottom we agreed on. In the middle, we're mixed up, but they're all so close.
They're all good. I mean,
no,
like maybe after those bottom 3, there's maybe 2 or 3 other episodes that we'd both kind of be like, weren't great, weren't the strongest. Again, we always say there's hit and misses. They'd fall into the misses, but far more hits. Far more successful far more successful episodes. And again, remember we said it too. With hosts you're not expecting, your Jack Burns, your Ruth Gordons, your Julian Bonds, like they're still doing enjoyable shows for the most part.
Right.
So kudos season 2.
Great job. That was a fun season. It really was.
Fun. It was enjoy. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I was almost like looking ahead to 3. I'm like at the start of the season, like let's get done 2 because then we can do 3.
Yeah.
And I was incorrect in that assumption because this was so much fun to watch. There's so many. I feel like this is the season of the forgotten sketches. I feel like at the end of future seasons, we won't have as many sketches that you're like, oh, these are the ones that you don't know that you got to revisit. Because I feel like season 2 is where they were throwing all these gems out, trying these things. Can I tell you my biggest worry?
Yes.
My biggest worry is they will no longer drop the cow.
Oh no, that would be horrible for you.
I agree. I am very worried that dropping the cow is gone after season 2.
I'm pretty sure now. Anytime there's a bad sketch, your note is going to be drop the cow.
I know.
Drop the cow. Drop the cow now.
I gotta. Someone drop the cow. That or a bad. I mean, or if the McGarrigle sisters come back out. Yeah, that's going to be my. You're so right. It's going to be like an over-under.
It already is.
It's an over-under on when Brad says drop the cow. Son of a bitch.
It's going to end up being in my notes for every sketch that I don't like.
You're like, my first note was, Brad has got to be saying, drop the cat. Like, shit, you're right.
Well, I thought it was a really fun season. I'm glad you did too.
It was a blast. It really was. I hope everybody out there enjoyed listening to it as much as we enjoyed watching and talking about it. Because, it was a lot of fun. We should say, like, it isn't just us. We had some amazing guests this season. Dennis Perrin,
yes.
Thomas Senna came back a couple of times. Walter Williams, the creator of Mr. Bill, joined us, which I still was awesome. John Snyder, of course, came back with us for our Buck Henry episodes. Andy Hoagland returned. Jordan Runtalk, Jamie Burwood, Seth Abramovich, Darren Patterson, all new folks to the show. Thank you guys all for joining us. Doug Hill, Jeff Weingrad, the authors of the Saturday Night Live book, which, was just so great to get them on and hear their stories and talk. So thanks to all of our guests for coming on and at least, somebody on here knowing what they're talking about.
And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to mix up with guests and get different perspectives. I think, some of the episodes or some of the sketches even, you and I may not have liked or we had different perspectives on, and then talking to our guests, it was good to get a different take. So thank you to all of our guests. It was great.
Or people who haven't watched like 8 Emily Latellas in a row and get their take on an Emily Latella sketch or something like that was fun. Or, it was good. Yeah. Thank you to everybody for joining us. And thank you for everybody, for listening. It's been great. The response has been great. We want to thank everybody for following us on Twitter and Instagram and all the conversations we have on there about stuff. It's been really great.
It's been great. It's been wonderful. And the support has been wonderful. So thank you.
If you haven't yet, please leave a rating, leave a review. We're going to be off for a couple weeks. You got time.
Yeah.
Hopefully some other people out there find us.
Yeah. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your friends' families. We are going to be taking a few weeks off. We're going to have a couple of special episodes in there. So keep your ears out for that. But that's it, I guess.
That's it. That's season 2, baby.
Next time we'll be talking about season 3.
We'll be back like May-ish. We'll let you know.
Many different hosts and many different musical guests. So until then, good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
The Not Ready for Primetime podcast is a 2 Pints Productions production. Produced and edited by Brad and Gary. Thought about by Brad and Gary. Please rate and review. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.